Welcome to Standard 6E. The goal of this presentation is to describe one of the major events in modern world history, the French Revolution. I'll be honest, as a history teacher, I've always found it a little strange that the French Revolution didn't get its own standard, but here we are towards the end of Standard 6, and we'll go ahead and take a look. The essential question we hope to answer in this standard is, how did the ideas of the Enlightenment contribute to causing the French Revolution? You studied the Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, in Standard 6B. So we're really looking to see how did the philosophies and the ideas that developed during the Enlightenment, the late early 1700s, how did they contribute to the outbreak of the French Revolution in the late 1700s? The essential understanding for this standard, we want to know the motto of the French Revolution, which was liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty is a synonym for freedom, equality referring to treating people the same, for example, applying the law the same or equally to all people. Fraternity is another word for brotherhood or togetherness, and these were very Enlightenment ideas. These weren't the ideas of an absolute ruler. So the motto gives us a little hint here as to how the Enlightenment is going to impact the start of the French Revolution. And the French are going to overthrow in this revolution the monarchy, the absolute rulers that have had control for centuries in France, establish a new government and really a new society. If you take a look at the poster, those red hats that we see the guy on the right wearing, they become very symbolic of the revolution. Our essential knowledge for this standard will divide up into three parts. We'll have the causes, the events, and the outcomes of the French Revolution. So our first cause of the revolution, as we mentioned already, was the influence of the Enlightenment thinkers. Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire, these guys were all from France, and by the late 1700s, their ideas had gained wide acceptance in their homeland. Add in some non-French philosophers like Locke, ideas like natural rights, separation of powers, just the whole idea of challenging divine right of kings. Those ideas had taken hold in France by the late 1700s. Another cause of the French Revolution was French participation in the American Revolution. I think sometimes in the United States we don't acknowledge how much of a role France played in our revolution, but France, both in terms of military leadership and money, is going to be a big participant in the American Revolution. In fact, France spent, I believe I read somewhere between 10 and 15 billion dollars in modern day money supporting the United States in the War of Independence. And it wasn't even so much because France loved the colonies, it was more that they loved that the colonies were challenging their chief rival, England. And so they saw this as an opportunity to weaken their rival, England. But by doing so and spending so much money, the French economy is going to go into big debt. Okay, they're going to rack up a lot of bills from this war. In this famous painting here of Washington accepting the surrender of the British at Yorktown, these are French soldiers here on the left side of the painting, just giving some indication of French participation in the American Revolution. At the same time that France was going into debt, the weather wasn't cooperating in France. France enters a period right before the revolution of drought, referring to lack of rain or lack of water, okay, and that's going to lead to crop failures, which lead to famine. And famines are periods of time where there's not enough food and often widespread hunger and starvation. Large numbers of hungry people in France are going to lead to large numbers of desperate people who will do anything for a change. Okay, our fourth cause of the revolution was the unpopularity of the king and queen. Louis XVI, think the I might have gotten cut off there a little bit. It's XVI for 16. And his wife, Marie Antoinette, are very unpopular by the late 1700s. Marie Antoinette in particular was given the nickname Madame Deficit for the huge bills that she ran up. And when told about the people starving out in the streets and in the countryside, she reportedly replied, "Let them eat cake," kind of a famous phrase in history. And it goes to show kind of an uncaring and out of touch attitude that she had, which made her even more unpopular with the people. Our fifth cause, and in many ways the most important cause of the revolution, was the inequality that existed between the three French estates. Inequality, of course, referring to unequal or different in treatment. And the French use the word estates to describe the social classes. We see the three social classes in this cartoon from the period. The guy here on the top left was a member of the first estate, the first social class, which were the clergy. Clergy is a fancy word for religious people. In France's case, these were the bishops, cardinals, priests of the Catholic Church. They were the top group in French society, the first estate. The guy on the top right here was the second estate, the nobles. Okay, and nobles typically were rich, but not always. Nobles were nobles. They were in the second estate because of their bloodlines. They were the noble families. And by virtue of their last name, their family name, they were the second estate. And that leaves everybody else in the third estate. And as we see in the cartoon, the third estate was holding everybody else up. Okay, we see here in these graphics a little bit about what we're talking about. The first estate, which was only 1% of the population, they're going to control 10% of the land. If everything was equal, 1% would control 1% of the land. And yet this tiny percentage of the population controls 10% of the land. The second estate was also very small. The nobles only made up 2% of the population, and yet they control 25% of the land. These two groups, which were only 3% of the population, are going to control 35% of the land in France. That leaves the majority of people, 97%, on 65% of the land. And as we see in the cartoon, this leads the third estate to a feeling of being crushed and oppressed by the first and second estate. That feeling is made even stronger by the fact that the third estate paid all the taxes. The first and second estate were exempt. They didn't have to pay the taxes. Okay, some events of the French Revolution that we're responsible for. We have three events from the standards. The first is the event that causes the start of the French Revolution. The French Revolution begins on July 14th, 1789, with an event called the storming of the Bastille. To storm a building is to attack it, to run in, as we see in the painting here, people with guns and swords and pitchforks and all kinds of weapons. They run in loud and they attack this building. The crowd was largely made up of the third estate. The Bastille was this building here that we see in the painting here on the right. It was originally built back in the 1300s as a fort in Paris to help defend the city, but by the 1700s it was mainly used as a prison and largely to hold political prisoners and people who couldn't pay their taxes, largely people from the third estate. So it became to be seen as a symbol of the system that the third estate hated so much. And as we see on July 14, 1789, this crowd attacks the Bastille. Today there's not much of the Bastille to see. There's a street named for the Bastille in Paris, in the Paris metro, the subway. There's a Bastille station. There's even a cool British band named Bastille. But the Bastille itself was torn down. Okay, we see here on a modern overhead map of Paris the red line showing where the Bastille once stood, and really all that you can see left of the Bastille are the bricks outlining the outline of the Bastille. July 14th is a big national holiday in France, so if you're ever in France during the summertime and you're in France specifically on July 14th, you can join many happy French people in shouting Happy Bastille Day. Okay, our second event, we're about 4 or 5 years into the revolution here when Louis the 16th is executed. Okay, he's put on trial and executed. Louis tried to roll with the revolution. We see him here dressed as a revolutionary. As we mentioned, those red hats were kind of symbolic of the revolution. But Louis couldn't really hide who he was. Okay, this was the real Louis. Louis realizes things are turning against him, and he's going to try and escape France along with his family. They put on disguises and head for the border. Unfortunately, they're recognized, unfortunately for Louis, excuse me, by legend. He was recognized by a guy because of Louis's face on a coin. Louis and his family are returned to Paris where they're put on trial, and Louis is executed. The same fate is going to befall his wife, Marie Antoinette, 9 months later. She's also put on trial, and she's executed as well. And that goes to show a little bit about the anger and the hatred towards him, that not only the king, but the queen as well is executed. Okay, the Reign of Terror, it was the period of extreme violence that the French Revolution is probably most noted for. During an almost year-long period from September 1793 until almost August of 1794, estimates vary, but most go up to about 40,000 people were killed in the violence of the revolution. A lot of this was caused by the fear of foreign attack. The areas that you're looking at labeled on this map were under control of the Habsburg Empire. Okay, you remember the Habsburgs back from the Reformation, the powerful Catholic family that once ruled the Holy Roman Empire. This was their empire in the 1700s, and Marie Antoinette wasn't born in France. She was born in Austria. She was a Habsburg. And so when the revolution, when she marries Louis and comes to become Queen of France, now that the revolution breaks out and Marie Antoinette is executed, there's a lot of angry Habsburgs ruling in Spain and the Netherlands and Austria. Even England is going to get involved in attacking France, okay, to restore the monarchy, to keep things the way that they were. Coupled with a new invention, a killing machine called the guillotine, and the mind of a guy named Robespierre, who's going to be at the head of all of this violence. Once the king and queen are gone, Robespierre is as close as there was to a ruler in France as the head of something called the Committees of Public Safety, okay, which was really responsible for all the bloodshed during the Reign of Terror. So you'd see a lot of scenes like these during that year as all these people are killed, many by the guillotine. The irony of all this, though, is that most of the people actually killed in the Reign of Terror were not from the First and Second Estate. They only made up about 15% of the people killed in the Reign of Terror. Most of the people killed actually were from the Third Estate. Okay, which now leads us to our outcomes of the French Revolution. Okay, we have two things we need to know. The first is that the French Revolution is going to put an end to absolute monarchy in France. No more rulers like Louis XIV, no more Sun King imagery, no more Versailles, and all the fancy glamour of the monarchy. All of that dies along with Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Okay, the other thing we need to know is the rise of this guy, a guy named Napoleon, who's really just a soldier out in the streets during the revolution, but is going to catapult to power. He's going to rise very quickly to power and become emperor of France.